All right, so this is going to be a review of Thor: Love and Thunder. I didn't like Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness. I did a rant on that, but maybe I'll feel better about this one because I do really like Thor Ragnarok. It's one of my favorites of the MCU. It's directed, once again, just like Thor Ragnarok by Taika Waititi. And I'll say how I feel about it in a little bit. I'm probably going to spoil some stuff, so you've been warned, I guess. I don't know how much I'm going to spoil, but there you go. So in this, Gore, played by Christian Bale, it starts off with him and his daughter in a desert. I guess the rest of his people or whatever died off, and he's praying to his god to keep his daughter alive, but she ends up dead anyway. And then conveniently, I guess he stumbles across some oasis, and he meets that actual god, who's a complete asshole and doesn't care about him at all or his people. So conveniently, once again, there's like this special sword that I guess kills gods that was right there, that somebody I guess used before, whatever. So he ends up picking it up, killing that god, and he gains certain powers, but he's also cursed from doing so. Um, so then you go to Thor. Thor is with the Guardians. They're going on missions and things like that, but he feels empty. He feels like he needs to find himself again, like we all saw from the trailer. Him and the Guardians, they take out some guys or whatever, save some kingdom, but then there's some distress signals, so they split up so that Thor could figure out what's going on with the gods being killed and things like that. So he goes back to Earth, goes back to New Asgard, and Jane Foster's there with Mjolnir, and so there's some things going on there, and there's them they're kind of flirting and like rekindling their love for each other and things like that. But Jane Foster, Thor, and Valkyrie have to go on this journey to potentially, I guess, defeat Gore, because Gore ends up actually taking some Asgardian children. So it's really all about that. Really, is them defeating him and saving those children. There's some good things, I'll be honest, and I did laugh a good amount of times actually. But the writing, once again, is an issue. There's so much kind of when it comes to storylines and characters and things like that, especially just being introduced to like the gods and things like that. But there's still so little going on here, but we'll talk about that in a second. Chris Hemsworth is Thor, still great. I still like Valkyrie quite a bit, even though it didn't really feel like she really needed to go on this journey with them, really. It could have really just been Thor and Jane Foster and I guess Korg, but she's along for the ride. I do like Tessa Thompson, and I like that character, so that's fine. I like the action. I think it's well choreographed and it's really fun stuff. It gets very video gamey. Like I like that the Mjolnir can like split up into pieces since it was cracked. And now it can split up into pieces and then go around and stuff like that. I like that. But that did feel like an upgrade from a video game, right? Like it did. I'm just gonna be honest. That was the first thing I thought of. And towards the end, there's a fight scene with Gore. And it's in the trailer. It's like black and white. That at that point felt like you should be like pressing different buttons on a controller, like a QuickTime event. But it was fun, so I'll give it that. I did laugh quite a bit. Like I said, um, there was one joke that I laughed at consistently that's throughout the movie, and you'd think it would get old, but it really didn't. Where it's more of a romance almost between Thor and Stormbreaker, where Stormbreaker is like getting like jealous of the way he talks about Mjolnir and stuff like that. It's like you almost forget that it's just an axe, like because they do really play into it, and it is actually really funny. So that was a joke that I consistently laughed at. Some of the interactions with the Guardians early on, even though a lot of that, almost all of it, was in the trailers. But that's how little they're in the movie. Like if you've seen the trailers, you've seen pretty much every interaction or moment between him and the Guardians, right? Like some of them I don't even think talked. Like did Drax even say? I think he had like two lines, but whatever. I enjoyed them while they were there, and there were some funny moments. I think that might be it. I mean, there are some interesting concepts here, like seeing all the different gods and the way that they perceive their disciples, or and things like that. It's like that show American Gods. I only saw the first season, but it's really interesting to think of gods existing in the real world, and the whole dynamic of the people that worship them, and things like that, or sacrifice themselves for them, and so there's some interesting things here. Ultimately, I don't think it's written very well and not executed well. Let's get to it. The negatives. there's not much development here, right? Gore, you don't really get to see him going around killing gods and stuff like that. You only really see the aftermath, right? Gore doesn't really, he's not really intimidating. Christian Bale's great, but the character, like, at certain points, he seems really overly serious to the point where he is kind of intimidating. And then other times, he's just laughing maniacally at really nothing and chewing scenery up. Like, so that character was felt inconsistent anyway, but you didn't really see him do much, right? Like I said, didn't show him killing the gods. He has his first interaction with Thor, and Thor like throws him across the street. It's like, am I supposed to be, scared of this person? Am I supposed to be worrying for Thor? Because I'm not at all. So there's that. Yeah, I think he's a really weak villain because he really doesn't even. He feels like he could have been replaced with anybody because he feels like it's mostly about like Jane Foster and everything going on with her and Thor and stuff like that. He feels like kind of an afterthought, and he definitely is not intimidating. And please, can we stop? Like, this is the second movie in a row. We're talking about Doctor Strange too. Stop with these MacGuffins where these characters are trying to get this thing that lazy screenwriting will give the person whatever they want or whatever they need. It's like, come on, it was the book of Vashani or whatever the fuck it was in Doctor Strange, and now it's this fucking thing. There's multiple MacGuffins in that movie, but there's a whole character that's a MacGuffin in that movie. But in this movie, like Gore is trying to go after this thing that gives you whatever you want, and so he wants to use that to wipe out all the gods at once. It's lame, right? It's really lazy, really truly lazy screenwriting. And speaking of lazy, Heimdall has a kid in this all of a sudden, really just so that he can use Heimdall like powers to talk to Thor when they've been captured. It's like that's forced for this movie, more forced things for this movie. Once again, Jane Foster and Thor, they have no chemistry. Really, they have a little bit more because this movie's a little bit more comedic and can kind of play with it, and they can be playful and flirty with each other. So there's a little bit more there, but there still isn't that much. So when Thor is like stumbling over his words, or he's like, complimenting her, or things like, or he remembers down to the day when they broke up, even though apparently she just gave him a no. It's like, okay, but whatever. He remembers down to the day, and it's like, I don't feel that. Not only is this movie lacking development from this movie, but from other movies, right? Like, the romance was terrible in those movies, but even Thor Ragnarok, we broke up, and then she's just not in these movies up to this point. But now apparently he's so empty and he's lost because he's lost his love of Jane Foster. Like, really? Just out of nowhere, really? Like, we're just gonna force that, like we did the Christine thing with Doctor Strange too. Like, god damn it. Anyway, the movie even forces these little flashback scenes of showing them, dating or going on dates or whatever, going roller skating or whatever they were doing, and going to Halloween parties together. It's like, this feels like it's from a whole nother thing. Like, this doesn't feel like these same two characters that have been going on throughout these movies that I've been watching for this long. Like, it doesn't feel like it at all. They did not have that dynamic. So now they're forcing it so that they can make you feel something for these emotional moments between the two, or root for them to get back together, even though, things are, kind of tragic when it comes to Jane Foster and, the things going on with her. And it doesn't work. It feels forced. Another thing that was the cringiest fucking thing, because I laughed quite a bit, but there were some jokes in here where I was like rolling my eyes, man. And there are a lot of like cringy moments, but the cringiest moments, there's two, where there's one where Jane Foster's just like, but I'm the mighty Thor. I was like, has this character read the comic books? Because she didn't establish that she had a name or anything like that in this movie, or like, all of a sudden she's just mighty Thor. And then there's a moment where Gore is like, oh, hello, Lady Thor, and she's like, that's mighty Thor. And I was like, it's so forced. It's like these characters have read the comic books, because there's no reason for her to go by Mighty Thor. There was never a point where she was like, hey, how about Mighty Thor? No, she just is Mighty Thor, right? Like, it's already been established because these characters have read the comic books. So that's the only thing that makes sense. These effects right here, man, you need to stop CG and helmets on characters, because that shit is ugly. I mean, that does never looks right. Like, there's a moment where Thor puts one on and then he just takes it off. He's like, oh, it's kind of hot in there. I was like, no, it kind of looks like shit, so you should all take that off. Like, what the, like, Jane Foster at so many points has this helmet. It goes away, and then she has this, she has the long blonde hair, which doesn't really fit for her. It doesn't look right. There's certain points where the characters don't look right in front of, like, in the environments that they're in. I mean, like, it looks bad. Like there was a point early on where it shows Thor as a baby, and I was like, wow, that I've been transported like back a decade with effects that look like this. It's ridiculous. So yeah, the effects at certain points absolutely abysmal, like terrible. I mean, there's just not much to this movie. I mean, it's just like it feels like they just needed a plot. They didn't know what to do. They needed a plot. They wanted to involve Jane Foster, and that's it, right? Remember when they announced that Valkyrie was gay at like the Comic Con or whatever, the same thing that they did, same time when they were like, "Hey, Lady Thor's gonna be in the next movie." Um, Valkyrie being gay in this is like a couple lines of dialogue, and she kisses a woman on the hand. That's it. That's it. And it's like, really? You needed to announce that? It just kind of feels pointless. I kind of feel like they didn't really know what they were doing with this or what they wanted to do, so they just came up with something, right? Like, hey, we have this villain from the comic books. He's killing gods, and Thor is a god, so he's gonna like, you know, deal with him and have a fight with him. And him and Jane Foster are gonna like rekindle their relationship while she's also Thor. So there's gonna be a little bit of like tension there with him, you know, and Mjolnir and wanting it back and stuff like that. That's about it. I mean, there's really nothing to this. Like, I sat there and I was like, wow. Like, I was for certain jokes, I was laughing and enjoying them. But for the most part, I was sitting there going like, I don't really know what I'm supposed to get from this. I don't really feel anything. I don't feel anything. There's not enough development. It felt like Morbius, where Morbius was an hour and 40, which is short. This movie's 2 hours, which is at least short for at least most MCU movies, from what I remember, or at least movies I've seen recently. You expect them to be at least like 2.5 hours. But this movie's 2 hours, but then I'm sitting there and I'm like, none of this really feels like it has enough development. Like there's moments that I feel like would flesh out the villain or flesh out certain things that are just not here. And it's like, so what was the fucking point? Like, anyway, and it's the way the movie ends too. They really try to hit you with this emotion, right? What they do with the villain, I didn't like. And, you know, it's kind of sweet in a way where Thor ends up at the end, but then I'm also thinking, like, okay, what's the implications of this? Anyway, that's it. I do think this is a worse movie than Doctor Strange: The Multiverse of Madness, and I didn't think that movie was that great. There were points where I was like, you know what, I could give it a little bit, you know, and maybe give it a positive review still, but nah, I'm gonna have to give it a mediocre review. I'm still gonna give this one, just like I did Doctor Strange 2, I'm gonna give it a rental. It's got some good moments and some interesting ideas, but there's just not enough on the page, man. The writing is just not that good. Once again, it's like what are we doing? We need to really figure out what the hell we're doing with the MCU going forward, right? I haven't been watching the shows. I'm gonna have to watch them now because they're like required viewing now. It feels like they just really don't know where they're going or know what to do, and they're just kind of doing something because they know they have a devoted fan base. They have certain critics and people that are gonna give it positive reviews no matter what. I guarantee you this is fresh. I guarantee you it's getting positive reviews because of course it will be. It's going to. It's destined to. Something has to be absolute trash like Eternals in order to get like a rotten on Rotten Tomatoes when it's in the MCU because they're too big now. They're too big. Certain people want to keep access, you know, when it comes to, you know, the reviews of these things. So that's just what it is. But this is an underwhelming movie. That sums it up completely. Underwhelming, which sucks because I love Thor Ragnarok. But anyway, that's Thor: Love and Thunder. Didn't really care for it. It comes and goes. I feel like we're gonna, for the most part, forget this. Yeah, that's it. We're done.